You're fired,
Uh,
Jeff.
you're fired,
No,
Warren.
you're
I
fired
thought,
on
I
me.
thought, I
He's
thought,
fired.
I thought that I would keep the job.
You're fired.
No, what's next up is this wonderful panel called "You're Fired: How Not to Over or Undercharge." How many years have you been a colorist full time? All right, so we got a really nice 30 split, more or less than a year, 5 to 10 years, 1 to 5 years. So it gives you a third of your audience really is people who are fairly new to being a colorist.
Mhm.
Let's see what our last question is. Have you lost a client job from specifically overcharging, undercharging, or both over and undercharging? Yeah, that's a
Wow. More of a
phenomenal
split than I
set of
thought.
questions. So, Dario, I hope that gives you some great insights.
It
And
looks
the
like
whole
we have the
panel, some
right
great
people in the
insights on
room.
people.
So,
Yeah.
well, for starters, first I wanted to, you guys have been up long hours. I only ducked out for 4 and I'm a little groggy. So a big credit to CSI and what's now iColorist, ICA, and Kevin Shaw's secret weapon, Gigi, in the background doing a lot of the work as well.
Yes.
So big nod to her and all the emails and hard work. So thank you for all this, because this has been a really fast, yes, everybody, hey, jazz hands, everybody, for Gigi and everyone else. Um, so it's been amazing seeing all this, and the community has grown, which has been pretty wild. I've only been in the business about 10 years, and seeing it changed so much from me just getting information from white papers and videos that Rodney Carmen would make, and then finding Warren back in the day. It's evolved in an amazing, amazing way. So congratulations everybody for sharing and being really nice. I want to intro the panelists. So sorry, I'm going to toggle through things. We have Rebecca Goodeve, who's a freelance colorist, and she's the CEO and senior colorist at Author Color in the UK. John Rogers, who's an independent senior colorist near London. Yes, wave when your name is called, please. Mostly working on commercials. Juan Salvo is a finishing artist and founder of the Color Space in NYC. And Roel Videler, or Roel Videler, I apologize, Roel. Ruth, senior
Close
colorist
enough.
at Media Monks in the Netherlands, working on digital content and commercials. I myself have been a freelance colorist for over 10 years, but I recently signed a contract with Bonfire and in New York City, and I mainly work on commercials. With that, we had done a little dry run. Juan, you're muted, just as a heads up. And we were talking about the experiences of undercharging and overcharging, how clients perceive that and where that goes. And also, by the way, at the end of all this, we'd love everybody to hop into a room to hear your own stories and bounce stuff off each other. But with that, I guess we can start getting into like the basics of anecdotes of how you determine your rates and when you're asking about budgets, because what we think we've experienced a lot is you say, well, Dale, what is your rate? And then you say, well, what is your project rate? Or what's your budget? And it's always that little standoff between you and the client of determining what they have and what's worth it. Um, I personally have used a couple things which kind of help. I try to find out who somebody has worked with in the past. If they're coming to me for the first time, who have you worked with? And within knowing who they work with, because I've whittled numbers out of companies over the years, I know what their range is. Have they worked with company 3 before, or the mill and things like that? And they've had a bad experience because they've had a slightly lower budget. They had a junior put onto it, and now they've not gone back to the mill or company 3, and they're looking for the best bang for buck with experience and pricing. And when I hear something like that, I know that I can offer a much higher rate because they work with guys who charge an extremely high rate. Um, everyone always never likes to talk about numbers, but I can say that the mill, company 3, and even the company I work for, they do start at asking rates with commercial agencies at least $1,000 or more, and then they get back, and you can always back into that. Recently, even just still with a commercial job, another number, they were able to get 1,200 an hour. Now that's not always the rate; those jobs don't always kick in that way. But from there, it still goes much lower than that. It even could possibly be even at half that when they start getting numbers. And the term that I learned from a freelance colorist who does high-end commercials, and he normally gets $2,000-$3,000 a day. The clients ask, well, what's your rate? And they say, we don't even give them their rate. We just ask them what their budget is. And then they say, we will back into your budget, because they're just already presuming the price is high. And that puts the client on not the back foot, but if they really want to work with these guys, then they can say things like, okay, we'll back into your budget. At this point in America, for freelancers at an hourly rate in cities, the average rate was about $115 an hour overall. Now, that's not every city, that's not every town, but that is something that at least maybe it can be a bar for anybody who's watching, especially the newer folk. You should not be charging under $100 an hour if you can. It's hard to do that. And we're talking about major cities in the United States. We're not talking about Europe and everything else, because it's always relative to where you live, because that's what drives the business. And that's a nice little eyebrow raise from Roel. So that's some of the things that I wanted to chime in on with that. We can also get into grandfathering clients, and then how do you also up your rates? And I wanted to throw it to possibly Rebecca, for starters, on thoughts on dealing with your clients' rates and how you know you've been undercharging or overcharging.
Hello. Yeah, I've actually only just recently upped my rates based on this conversation that we've recently sparked, because I've realized that actually I could be charging a lot more. So I own my own grading suite, but just outside of London. So I don't have the overheads that a lot of this, like, big facilities would have. But you know, it's still all fun and games. But it's definitely that whole back and forth that Dario first mentioned, when I always find clients are never willing to tell you what their budget is. It's always based on, well, how much do you charge? And then they'll either go from there. I mean, I once, so that poll at the beginning I found quite interesting, because a lot of people will easily not get a job because clients can't necessarily afford you. But I've once lost a feature film. You know, they approached me and they were like, we really love your work, really want to work with you, etc., etc. So I gave them, they wouldn't tell me what their budget was. So I was like, fine, gave them my full quote. And then I ended up losing the job because I was too cheap in comparison to Technicolor, which I thought was hilarious, because I'm not gonna compare. I'm gonna be a lot cheaper than Technicolor. I mean, they're enormous, and I'm a one-man band. So, but then when I asked them, I was like, oh, who's grading your film? Because I worked at Technicolor before I became freelance. So, and they were like, oh, we don't know. So, you know, you go from choosing your artist and paying for it to then not understanding what they're actually paying for. So I don't know, I found that interesting about the whole budget thing.
Know your audience, so to speak.
Yeah.
If you know they're looking at somebody, then it also helps to know what ballpark you should be in.
Yeah, and I feel like in that instance they just went with Technicolor because of the Technicolor name, not necessarily because of who was grading it. I mean, it probably, I don't know who ended up grading it. They didn't even know. But yeah, it's interesting, you know, you get it both ways. But ever since upping my rate, I've not lost any work because of it. So it just goes to show that actually I probably was massively undercharging. So don't be afraid to push yourself. And also, like, if you do get like the odd job, like if it's really worth it and you think,
we can cover that, where you're adjusting for a creative job as opposed to other.
yeah,
That's been discussed repeatedly, and that's something else too, always to consider, that if you're starting out, because I mean, I guess our poll was there for a reason. A lot of the newcomers, if you have a job that's, you know, beautiful and you have the time to do it, and you need something for your real, we all, I would assume almost, I don't want to speak for it, but we all started out or even the new guys. I know some experienced people that if they have time or they'll squeeze something on the weekend, it's a passion project. Absolutely take it. You don't have to draw a line. But if your clients
I
have money,
passion
then
project.
don't let them short you. So
I did a passion project 3 weeks ago, for example, where it was literally nothing, basically like almost next to nothing pay wise. But then as soon as I posted it onto Instagram or whatever, I got so many messages, and then I got loads of work from that post. So you have to weigh it up sometimes. I mean, it's not all about money, it's about networking at the same time. And now those people are willing to do me favors because I do little stuff on the side as well, and you know, swings and roundabouts.
I'm going to toss to John next. Who's your client? Who they work with before, and what is it? What is it worth to you as well? So, John, you've had some.
No, completely. Yeah, I was going to say that I've had the same thing with British clients where they don't tell you how much they have in the budget, but with American clients, I find that they're very open and that they will if you ask.
Yeah.
So usually you have to ask because, to be honest, what American budgets have, whatever I'm going to quote, the American budget will always be more. So it's worth at least asking.
Juan looks like he's ready to pounce. If you're still waking up.
Sorry, I was just actually responding to there were some good questions raised about the rates in the chat. I think sort of backtracking a little bit and maybe to address some of the things that are raised in the chat here. I think one of the issues is that we face an enormous lack of information in this area, because we don't communicate very clearly what rates are. We don't really talk about them. It's kind of verboten a little bit. And particularly if you're looking at the facility side of things, like I run a facility essentially, we intentionally are obscuring what we actually charge because it varies. It's not all hourly rate in the sense of like all work is the same, or all work requires the same level of skill, or all work is time consuming or intense. And so we will vary our rate significantly and make a lot of concessions with clients that, or one client that we might not be able to make or be willing to make with another client. And so we end up having to, basically try to feel our way through the dark in terms of these things, and also figuring out what our peers are charging, what our, industry supports. And I think this is where you run into issues like Rebecca's experience, I've experienced, I think we've all experienced, where we're kind of feeling our way blind. I think the biggest thing that I've learned over the years to kind of deal with that is to, let me say this. Often you will, obviously the first course of action is to say, tell me what your budget is. And often you'll get some pushback or a little bit of needling with that. And you can totally understand why, because there's a difference between, say, when you're dealing with agencies, you'll rarely get that pushback because agencies are not really, it's not their money.
They're spending someone else's
They
money.
don't care. They have a budget they have for that thing. And if they hit the budget, great. If they're under the budget, that's fine for them too. If they're over the budget, they're in trouble. So like that's the extent of what they care about, right? And their client is the one actually footing the bill. It makes no difference to them one way or the other. But very often you're dealing with independent production, independent producers, people actually paying out of pocket, people who have a strict budget, people who are maybe overextended and trying to compensate for somewhere else that they had an overage. And so they're looking for the best value, but at the same time, you don't want to go with the cheapest option as you run into. If you're bidding out, we have a lack of information. There's an information disparity. So like, for example, if you've ever done like home improvement work, you'll, as a homeowner, you'll get multiple proposals on bids on a project. You'll very rarely want to go with the cheapest person, just because you're dealing with the lack of information. You don't necessarily know how to determine who's a capable technician, who's a capable craftsman. So you're really struggling with trying to read between the lines and figure out who the right person for the job is. And so you'll often just automatically eliminate someone that's just too cheap. You'll probably automatically eliminate someone that's so expensive too, because they're just outside of your budget, and you're not going to negotiate with somebody who's way outside of your
The
budget.
Goldilocks colorist, just right.
It's the Goldilocks craftsman of everything, right? So one thing I found is like, yes, the first course of action is to ask what their budget is. Sometimes you'll get a little pushback. Regardless of whether you get pushback or not, nobody's going into these negotiations as a producer, as a filmmaker, completely blind. They know in their heart of hearts that they have a number that they want or they need. And so you can push back a little bit more and be like, I really need to know what your budget is. I don't want to insult you. I don't want to like confuse things by throwing numbers out. You know, my full rate might be too high for you, but if you give me a budget, then I can get a sense of like, how can I make that work within my process? How can I adjust to suit your budget? What can I offer to you at that price point? And sometimes that's, for me at least, that's been like, let me send this to somebody junior who will actually, you know, be really happy with that rate. Or great, that's way more than I was going to ask for.
I find that harder to find nowadays because it's gone from having a phone conversation to now it's all either email or text, and you don't see your phone, and it's hard to kind of go back and forth, and people don't respond quickly sometimes.
That's 100% true. And then there's always the beautiful thing about it is you can send an email saying, "Hey, give me a call," right? And more often than not, that's a lot easier for people, and they'll be happy to do it.
I've asked for phone calls so many times, and people just write back the one answer after the three that I've asked only. So I find that
just ask one question. Yeah, that's what you just ask the one question. Do one ask. That's, I mean, there's also a generational thing, and we can get into that stuff more. But I think that there is a kind of if you deal with like particularly with like commercial agencies, you're generally dealing with producers who are younger. Like the senior people are not going around hiring post houses. They're just told like, go call whoever, we're going to do it there. So the person you're usually dealing with is usually younger, has a mindset of just kind of very sort of, in my experience at least, very direct communication. It makes it a lot easier.
I don't find they haggle as much these days. Like if you don't get the right number, there's been plenty of times where all of a sudden if the number is not exactly right, you just hear crickets. And it's been a little bit more, I think it's changed much more recently into that, which has been very tricky.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, this may be a little off topic, but I think I've noticed a change in the time that we've been in sort of these, the pandemic stuff where there's just less nonsense. Like there's less of the superfluous stuff happening, you know, schmoozing and in person and, you know, lunches and whatever else, you know, the agency stuff happens.
I can say that on the agency side, they've slashed like half the amount of people. But they're doing just as much work. So they're slammed and they've got no time for anything. It's been something I've seen recently, especially in the time of COVID. Yeah.
So I saw a question on the chat about the survey missing questions like when did you lose a job to being underbid by competition? And I'd like to go into that a little bit because I think it's kind of important, and maybe it's sort of a mental dealing mechanism I have. But generally, if someone has underbid me or has like I'm not trying never to be the cheapest. It's just a bad position to be in. But if someone's undercutting me and the producer's going for that without negotiating, then they're just going for the cheapest, and you can pretty much count on that cooperation not being very pleasant generally. So I don't really regret missing out on those jobs.
You're not gaining money, you're losing a bad client.
Yeah, completely.
So I wanted to point that out for a sec.
I kind of put it down to as well, like I've never known what other people charge. So like, especially when you're starting out, I found it very, very difficult to know what the hell to charge clients. It's I'll just be plucking numbers out of the sky and be like, I hope this is okay and you know, I will have work. So it's taken years to be able to get to a comfortable place where I can ask for, actually, you know what, this is what I think my work is worth. And But you know, when like 7 years ago, I'd be like, I don't know, is this okay? So I do think it is really hard when you're starting out as a client, as a colorist, to know what to charge, because people aren't open books and be like, hey, this is how much I charge. Like, let's have a chat about it.
Why Warren asked me to have this kind of specific, because I've talked about it offline for so long, and Warren was just like, yeah, stir the pot, Dario, have a chat on this. And of course, it is the one taboo kind of conversation. But everybody talks about it one-on-one. But now that the group of colorists have been more communicative overall, it just seemed like something worth, worth throwing in, and also just trying to make everybody more comfortable knowing where everybody's kind of in that range. Of course, it again is regional, and it all depends because of what the clients can demand. But
couple of people in the chat asking.
Yeah, can I just draw your attention to an earlier panel from the German CSI chapter?
Oh yeah, that's right.
Done an international survey, and the data is quite interesting. It's well prepared, and the one for next year is even more defined, because it separates: are you charging for kit, or are you just charging your own rate? Are you salaried, or are you freelance? And I think one of the things that we can do as a community.
How many people were in that survey? Do you happen to know?
306, I think.
308 answered the question.
Sorry, I lose 2 marks. 308. But the thing is that as a community, and this is a great opportunity to make sure that that data set for 2020 is bigger. And the more we share that information, it's totally anonymous, but it is broken down into geographical areas. And I think the more we share that information amongst each other, the less chance there is of being blindsided by a client who says, oh, well, I can go down the road and get it for, half the price.
Yeah, thanks for sharing this again. And I also see, when I see the questions in the chat and hear your what you said, so I see that this is very important, and the demand is even higher than I thought. So yeah, and thanks, Rebecca, for sharing your experiences. It seems like you've been working for some years in the industry, but still there's some myth of knowledge about salary ranges, right? So
yeah, I don't know, maybe I think this I think the guys have, and since we started this chat, have definitely given me some kind of confidence boost. Like, to be, I mean, I don't mind being completely transparent. So like 2 weeks ago, I was only charging like £600 for an entire day. But that's 7 hours, like 10 till 6 for lunch break.
Rebecca, was that with your own equipment?
This is in my own studio, so I have overhead all of my entire equipment.
So I think everybody needs to face up to that if you're charging for yourself as a freelancer, then that might, even that's still a bit low, but that might have been acceptable. But if you're charging for that, including all the equipment you've got.
And this is what I thought about, because like I've spent about 40 grand on equipment, and then I've got the actual building itself. But the good thing is that I don't have to pay to commute.
No, but that's your benefit, not the client's benefit.
Car you bought a
But yeah, so since then I've now upped it to 900. So, and I talk to people and they're just like, yeah, cool. When are you free? And I'm like, oh, that's like, I didn't expect that. So it's really nice just to have that support and that, the community of, of other people going, yeah, you can do that. Like, you're worth that, and going for it, and, and it actually working and having, yeah.
I've got to tell you too that in my experience, you can sometimes put your rate up and get more work because now they think you must be more senior.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I think it also can filter out a lot of jobs you don't want to do. And but I love working on like short films and stuff. I do a lot of like first time filmmakers, and I really like doing like short films. So I don't, obviously they don't really have that kind of budget. So, you have to be flexible for the kind of work you want to do. But that's totally fine, because,
Something else we had covered on an earlier chat, just as a briefing, when you do raise your rate, and as Kevin, brought it up, you might lose some clients, but you gain others, and you have to have the confidence as well as the real that can support that. where I had literally doubled my rate from freelance getting into some other work. And it definitely opened the doors in agencies that were looking for the sweet spot number, but it definitely closed out a bunch of other smaller production companies that were, you know, used to a different number. So it does depend on the worlds you travel in within the type of
but listen, you have to look at it from a business point of view as well. If you're doing, you know, flat out 40 hours a week at a cheap rate, you've got no room to expand. If you double your rate but only get half the hours,
yep,
you can expand 100%.
Mm.
So you got to think about what it costs you to actually work. You know, an accountant will break this down in a very material way and say, well, you should go and you know,
and there's the overhead factor
because you're going to be better.
Yeah, well, you know, Juan runs a small, you know, boutique spot. You know, some of the boys at in Mixing Light, Robbie, they've got, you know, they have overhead, and there's stuff nowadays with COVID. It's a little bit different, but there's overhead, so it does factor in. But of course, that also counts for clients coming in. There's the client services, all that other stuff. So there is a huge range, and it just kind of works out the way. Also, the support services, where if you're doing a much bigger film, to have the team working on it, multiple people doing multiple things, different things that need to be done, it's a whole different, you know, can of worms.
Yeah,
that
when you
a
do it at
small
my
one-person
level,
shop can't take on.
I hate to do this. Pardon me. I'm so sorry. I mean, this is the thing is, I'm going to get a bunch of flack for interrupting you guys, because this is just an amazing
Jeff.
conversation. So
We should
what
do
we're
this
going to
again.
do in about a half hour from now, when we open up breakout rooms, is we're going to open up one specifically about freelancing and rates, just to continue this sort of conversation. But before I go any further, could I just get some, as we've been calling it, jazz hands, but it's really applause from people with their mics off, just to let our panel know just how great this conversation has been. And you know, I know what a bunch of people are thinking, because I'm thinking it. I could watch this for an hour. I could see questions like this fielded for an hour. And I'm sure Kevin, I, and Warren are going to sit back and go, oh, we should set up an ICA meeting, you know, where we do this as a panel. And I'm sure that's going to happen. Great stuff. I hope we can all be more financially solvable, and despite the chaos going on in the world.
Thanks, guys. That was great.
Figure out a breakout room another time.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody. Good luck. Stay healthy. Wear a mask.
You guys were fantastic. Yeah. Stay healthy and wear a mask is right.